Good evening, everyone. Come on in the room, as Tabitha Brown would say. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, and I am here with you tonight for a wonderful conversation, something that is tied to us living well, a little bit different than what we normally do, because tonight is not necessarily about self-care or getting your money right or anything like that, but it's something that's very important because it impacts all of us, no matter where we live, no matter, what we do for a living. We are all impacted by the things that are going on in the environment around us. So as you're coming in, if you don't mind, you can let us know where you're joining us from. If it's your first time, just say hello so we know who all is here. I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, GA, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And it is just an honor for me to be able to come to you and bring these wonderful conversations with intelligent, brilliant, powerful Black women. And tonight's guest definitely falls into that category. So by means of introduction, I want to introduce you to our special guest, Heather McTeer Toney, who is an attorney, environmentalist, speaker, and writer. She was the first Black, first female, and youngest mayor elected in Greenville, Mississippi at the age of 27. In 2014, she was appointed by our forever president, Barack Obama, as regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency's Southeast region. Formerly the senior director for Moms Clean Air Force, Toney is now vice president of community engagement for the Environmental Defense Fund. And tonight we're going to be talking about her book that comes out in a couple of weeks, Before the Streetlights Come On. And most of us have heard that before. Before the Streetlights Come On, Black America's Urgent Call for Climate Solutions. So without any further ado, welcome, Heather.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me this evening.
Yes, as I told you when you came on, we were smiling and laughing, and I was getting teary-eyed, all kinds of stuff was going on behind the scenes. So, this is just such a wonderful conversation. It's an important conversation, and I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and introduce your book to the Brown Girl Collective Live Well Sister audience. So thank you.
Absolutely. I'm grateful that you're holding the space, holding the space to have these kinds of conversations that are so meaningful to our community that we often don't get to have. So I'm really excited to jump right in. Glad to be a part of the family and really look forward to this evening.
Yes. Oh, we have someone who's joining us from San Francisco Bay. Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going out that way. Welcome. Welcome. So I'm just going to start it off at the beginning. Black people and climate change, climate solutions. Well, I'll admit, I told you this before, at first I'm kind of like, okay, Black people and climate. But once you get into it and start really hearing how it impacts us in our communities, it just makes a whole lot of sense for us to be having these conversations. So how did you get involved initially in this type of work?
So I think, like a lot of people, that when we say, okay, Black people and climate change, is the stereotype of Black people don't do climate. Like, we're not environmental folks. And I think that is such a misnomer, because we're actually in it and around it. And it's a part of what makes us who we are. and it's visibly invisible in our lives. And it was definitely that for me. So I, like a lot of people, did not think I was an environmentalist. I thought environmentalists were white people who were vegan and wore Birkenstocks and hugged trees and lived like in Northern or Southern California. No offense to our friends from California, or to like some place that was, you know, really earthy and woodsy, because I never saw myself in the work. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes the same for so many of us. We don't see ourselves in the work. When I was looking up what is an environmentalist, I saw images that didn't look like me, and they were very singular, and they didn't represent community and family, which is, for a lot of people of color, that's the cultural awareness that we come from. And that was the culture that I was brought up in. So I was born and raised in the Mississippi Delta. My parents are from Baltimore, and they came to Mississippi as a part of the voters' rights movement. They're retired now, but they definitely brought my brother and I up in a household of both social justice and education as just a part of our everyday lives. And in that, I have always been very connected to community. But it wasn't until I got older and was serving in office as mayor that I, in the work to try to expand the community, got connected to climate and environment through something really simple, trying to clean water, which is unfortunately something we're still trying to do in communities around this country today.
Right.
And it was through Lisa Jackson, who was then the first African-American administrator for EPA under our forever president, President Barack Obama. And she was in my community. She said, you know, this is environmental justice work, right? And I said, no, no, Lisa, it's not. She's like, yes, right. It really is. And that both made me angry, in a sense, to know that this community, this very agrarian society that I had been raised in, was steeped in environment. And the only thing that I could really reckon with was people coming in from the outside, taking pictures and then putting it on the back of a pamphlet to go and raise money for. Like there wasn't a connection to us. We were a part of just, this is what poverty looks like. This is what environmental degradation looks like, but not connecting it to solutions in the community. So I was a little upset, really, that awareness hadn't been brought to the community. And at the same time, I was encouraged and empowered through Lisa Jackson, who said, okay, come on, you come, I want you to come and be a part of the local government advisory committee for EPA. And me being young and excited, and it's like, okay, this is great. She said, time out, sis, you don't know what you don't know yet. And truer words could not have been spoken, because 2 weeks after that, the BP oil spill happened. And I was thrust into a space of now having to lead a committee of local elected officials to talk to the federal government of what do local people want when there's some type of environmental disaster. And from that experience, I saw the value of local people and local voices, how you have folks who are experts in spaces that leaders need to listen to. And it's so basic. We would have community members come in and tell us, make sure that y'all are paying the people who know, who are really coming out here to the community. Because I can tell you that I can tell you who's going to show up on Monday after they got paid on Friday and who's not. And that kind of information would be so valuable, because it can dictate how quick your community gets fixed and cleaned. So those were the kinds of lessons that I began to learn are part of environmental justice, are part of climate and climate change, and why we have to be so present.
Yes, and as you were talking, I'm thinking about, your rural community. Well, was it rural? I'm going to assume that it was.
Oh, yes. Yes. So Mississippi Delta, very, very rural community.
Right there, I think, like I told you, being from Cleveland, that's now considered the Rust Belt. Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, some of those places where people, migrated to for work and were working in all these factories. I also thought of course, and you talk about these in the book as well, areas like Louisiana, like, New Orleans, and even some of the places in Florida. And I didn't mention this to you before we came on, but my father was born and raised in a small town in southern Ohio that's basically coal mining.
Mm.
So there's that too. So that was going through my mind as I was reading just the things that I know about his community and things
Right.
like that. And so for me, that is the way I was able to really tie these environmental issues to some of the communities that we actually live in and how they impact us.
Absolutely. It's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book. I wrote before the Streetlights come on as a way to both share our stories and shared experience of interacting with climate and environmental injustices, and tie it to the foundation of everyday social injustices that we deal with in our community, and really attempt to break down these barriers of there's climate change and voting rights, there's climate change in health, there's climate change and dealing with the disparities of education, there's climate change and police brutality. We often get into a situation of thinking we have to make a choice between the two. What's more important? Do I decide I'm going to focus on women's rights or I'm going to focus on climate change? And I wrote the book as a way for the African American community to understand, A, we have already intersected these things. It's not a stretch for us. We've already done it. But also, B, for the world to understand the brilliance and expertise that people of color bring to solutions, right? And we bring it through our stories. So there's no way that as an environmentalist and a climate advocate that I can ignore the George Floyd dilemma. Why? Because I know my communities are hotter. And I know that warming makes people agitated. And I know that if we don't address it, then we're going to see more George Floyds. So I can't separate them. There's no room in our lived experience to be able to afford to separate these issues. And it makes us so well suited to try to address issues at a larger scale and through our lived experiences.
Yes, yes. And now I do have to backtrack a little bit just to the title, Before the Streetlights Come On. Now, I don't know if the younger kids know anything about that, but I grew up in an era where I heard that, be in this house before the streetlights come on. So what was it explain it to those who may not know what that means.
That's right. And I don't think some people still know. They're like, they feel some inkling of it.
and why did you choose that as a way to center the story or center the book?
When I think about what made me, what is an urgent action for me, right? And what things made me move as a child and even, caused me at my age now to recognize that something's happening and I need to do something different. I related back to streetlights. I grew up in Greenville, where we had, of course, some streetlights that worked, some streetlights that didn't work. And you knew if you were in the right neighborhood, if you were somewhere the streetlights weren't working all the time, or they were constantly out, or somebody was either throwing rocks at them or shooting them out. That was a clear indication you weren't where you were supposed to be.
Right.
But it was like this indicator of time that it was universal. Everybody knew it because across the city, they typically all came on at the same time. And depending upon where you were, you could tell that, all right, it's starting to get dark. The lights are going to start coming home on, which means I got to be inside the house in a place that is safe,
right?
A place where I'm accountable and, somebody can put their hand on me. They know where I am and what's going on. And it means I had to have wrapped up everything else I was supposed to be doing, because if I wasn't, I didn't get to go out again. Right. So when I thought about climate change and how to connect it to tenets of the African American experience, that's what immediately came to my mind, because dealing with the climate crisis is very much akin. And I think we're at a place where we still have an ability to address the climate crisis if we understand what the consequences are, and if we understand that we need to get it done so we can keep playing and doing the stuff we like to do.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why it just made so much sense to me. It's like, okay, we need to get this done before the streetlights come on. We need to really ramp up our climate actions so that we actually can not only be safe and our communities and our families be safe, but that we can continue to enjoy this planet and this space and this environment that we have. I didn't like being cooped up in the house.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
And to the extent that even this generation Alpha and the generation Z that's young and upcoming now are connected to technology, but even to some extent they're connected to a technology that is showing them what outside is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm. But they're not getting out and enjoying it.
So we have to do this as both a part of the collective humanity that sits on this planet. All of us do not have Jeff Bezos money, so we can't necessarily say we're going to get in a rocket and go somewhere.
Right.
So we got to figure it out here in this space in a way that is protective of our homes and our families, and we can continue to do the work that I know God has put us on this planet to do.
All right. That is good stuff. Now talk about, okay, we hear climate change all the time. We hear things like global warming. And one of the other things I wanted to mention in this book, number one, you explain things in a way that makes it very, very clear because you use language and different analogies and things that can relate. We'll get into some of that in a minute. But I also love that you give us definitions. You give us solutions, things that we can work on. So it's not just, you're telling us what's going on, but you're also showing us how we can be involved in different ways in our own community. So I really love that about this book. But for those who may not understand some of what climate change or global warming, things like that even mean, just give us kind of a brief synopsis, just like so people know.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I can actually take some of it right from here because that is one of the things I wanted to focus on in the book was the fact that just in plain language, us understanding what we're talking about and relating it to us. So you're right, in every section of the book, there are definitions to make it make sense, but also action items that are in here so that we know, all right, we have something to do. And so the thing that I wrote about understanding climate change is that, it is the climate is always changing. Mm-hmm. Right? It is actively changing. We're in the process of. So it's not a point and destination in time. It is not like climate change is going to happen. No, we are experiencing a changing climate right now every single day. In Mississippi, for the past 3 weeks, there have been storms, extreme weather events that have come through. And all of these things are tied together as a part of the cycle of a changing climate. The thing we have to understand is that there is human influence to that. So what we do every day can impact how quickly the climate changes. And human activity has been the primary cause of why the climate has changed so quickly, so vastly. And it's also, it's not like we're going to go from this point of being level in terms of our temperature to it being really, really hot. That's not exactly how climate change works. It's more of a pendulum swing. And where the pendulum swing has been really slow like this, you have warm years, not so warm years, but it's not that much of a difference. As there's more human impact to the climate, we're putting more chemicals in the air, we're putting more oil and gas into the air. It's causing that pendulum swing now to be like this. So now our years go from, we have a what folks used to call you have a light winter. We've had one this past winter. My mom would say all the time, the mosquitoes didn't get killed. We're gonna have a rough, summer, right? It didn't get cold enough to kill off everything. It's funny how we can think about now how our folks would say these things that really were connected to the environment. Well, then the pendulum swings the other way to the complete opposite end, where the next year it's freezing cold. We have extraordinary, extreme weather. And then it flips back the other way again. You have drought, which we've seen in the Mississippi River area of this past summer, where people were walking out into the middle of places in the Mississippi River that they typically had not been able to reach. People being able to go into sand beds and pick up Civil War bullets because they're places that had not been uncovered. When just 3 years before that, there was extraordinary flooding such that the barges could not move up and down the river, and farmers in Ohio and Iowa lost crops in their fields because there was just nowhere to move it. So it's the understanding of the connection of how the climate changes in extremes, where we are in it, and then what we can do to slow it and reverse it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Just to, even know what it is. I love what you say about global warming. Mm-hmm. You have a particular way that you describe what that is.
Yes.
Tell us what that is.
So I describe global warming almost as, how your grandma had a blanket. Mm-hmm. And if you're laying down, if you were laying down on the bed and someone were to put a blanket over you, one of those nice crochet blankets that you could stick your fingers through the holes, probably got in trouble for it. Right. But you could lay down underneath of that blanket, and the temperature was such that you could still breathe. You had some cover over you in case you had the window unit on, and you were okay. But what happened when somebody came and they would throw a big heavy blanket on top of that? They came and you might be sleeping, and one of your cousins came and threw one of the quilts over top of you. Well, then all of that heat is now trapped inside, and before you know it, you're sweating. And you're sweating, and everything around you gets wet. Well, that's a great way of understanding what happens to the earth with global warming. We have a beautiful crochet blanket that is wrapping us, that's supposed to protect us. It keeps the right rays from the sun out. It allows the right amount of heat to leave, and it keeps our natural environment in a way where we don't have to worry about the extreme mosquitoes and things, right? But when we put too much pollution into the air, too many big companies that are pumping emissions and toxic chemicals into the atmosphere, too much use of not renewable, like sun and solar energy sources, too much of that into the atmosphere. Now we have created this big heavy blanket that's on top of us. And that big heavy blanket that gets put over top of the earth, that's what's causing us to sweat. So there's where we're creating now the space for the polar ice caps to melt, the sea level rise, the hurricanes, the cyclones, the wildfires that happen. All of that happens because we basically got too hot. We put on grandma's quilt, and we should have just kept the nice crochet blanket that we have over top of us. I think we can get that heavy quilt off because we have been able to identify, scientists have been able to identify what emissions are causing us to get so hot. And we can reduce them in a way that helps us to relieve that heat. Like you say, come and taking that blanket off and restore our planet back to the space where, again, we're able to really protect and take care of our environment.
Thank you so much. I love that analogy in the book. And there are others, this is just to give you all, everybody who's watching, this is just a teaser because this is a book that you really need to read. I mean, I probably say that every time, but this is something that doesn't matter who you are or where you live in this nation. It's impacting you in some, shape, form, or fashion. So that's what makes this so important. And once again, the solutions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, we've already kind of talked about some of the parts of the country where Black people tend to live in higher droves, and that is the South, the Southeast. and also looking at like some of the Rust Belt areas where people migrated to and things like that. So just talk a little bit about how specifically in some of the communities that we are living in, how the things that are happening in the environment are impacting us negatively.
You know, it's tough to help. I think the global majority understand what the impact of environmental injustices have been, specifically in the African American community, because in order to do that, you got to understand the struggle of the African diaspora. And that's a hard space to go to. And one of the beginning things that I tried to outline in the book is what that meant, like what that experience actually is, what it means to be from a space, an ecosystem of people, planet, germs, right? And then to be tragically taken from that ecosystem, lifted across waters to an entirely different continent and ecosystem, different trees, different weather, different germs, different animals, and then forced to work alongside people, not even alongside, work again under people who were from a totally different ecosystem. The ability, first of all, to do that, and the fact that we are living survivors of that, means that environmental resiliency is in us. Like everybody who's here, we have it in it, is a part of us. But also a part of that trauma that we carry was coming from our ancestors having been placed in environmental situations that we reflect on today. So the very fact that, you know, our ancestors were placed into slave holes where there was very limited airflow, where there was the connection of people close together, stacked on top of each other, connected by iron, dealing with all of the atrocities of not only diseases that were rampant, but lack of nutrition, lack of airflow. Physically, what that does to the body, it completely decimates our ability to function. Not only did we survive that, we are today still living in some of those same scenarios and situations. So you think about the projects in the urban community. People stacked on top of one another, iron bars around windows, limited airflow because the way that communities have been structured, not because that's what we wanted to do, but because of racist laws that were put in place by government officials, from federal housing, redlining. You know, all of this is a part of our history. We can look back to see, all right, well, this is part of the reason why my children might have asthma. You know, it is in addition to the places where we've been forced to live as a result of redlining, as a result of where jobs have been located in industries where they need strong labor forces. All of that is on top of the fact of how we got here and what our experience with the environment and culture has been. The beautiful thing to me is, again, not only do we embody this resilience, but what we carry with us. And there are places in the book where I hope to provide insights of hope and the thoughts of how we have been so creative, and this creativity lives within us. Women who were brought over on some of those ships, you know, braided rice into their hair as a way to bring the culture and some semblance of that environment, some semblance of the nourishment, some hope of growth. Not even knowing where you're going, but having the idea that you have the knowledge and the ability to plant something that you are familiar with and multiply it and grow it in a foreign space, right? Without any knowledge of where you're going. So the intuition to do that, and us to now be able to look back and see where we've grown from that, has to be a part of our encouragement to touch some of those elements of our ability to create solutions.
Yes, yes, that is so good. Thank you for diving into that, because I thought that was powerful, because it's something I never really thought about, because everyone grows up with a different experience, and I didn't have that experience, but I know people that do and did. So it's like, wow, yeah, now that you say that, it is kind of like, yeah, it's not an environmentally sound situation where they are, not to mention where it's located. It's near these factories where there are all kinds of things going on at the factories, and gas is being burned off and all different sorts of things like that. So not only is where you live not environmentally sound, but the neighborhood in which you live is not either.
Absolutely. And it's so important for us to be able to step into having those real conversations as a part of, this is what we have to address right now today for our communities, but as a part of the larger solutions to what we need to do on climate change that protects our communities, protects the planet. I'm really excited about, the new venture that I'm doing. So this is very fresh and new. So I've just started a role as the new executive director for the Beyond Petrochemical campaign. It's a part of a Bloomberg initiative, and it is specifically addressing what is happening with petrochemicals in those industries. So petrochemicals are the things that plastic is made out of. Okay. And if you think about like Louisiana and Cancer Alley, when you see all of these big chemical companies and smokestacks, pretty much anybody can probably think of, oh, I know that neighborhood over across from the river that has some semblance of that. It is so important that we step into understanding how even that industry is trying to take advantage of the vulnerabilities of low-income communities that have happened throughout history. So in Louisiana, Cancer Alley is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And it's been called that because it's this 17-mile stretch of Mississippi River land that has nothing but oil and gas and petrochemical facilities dotting it. Mm-hmm. What a lot of people don't know is many of those facilities sit on the exact same footprint as plantations did pre-Civil War. So let's just think about that for a second. The very fact that the petrochemical industry that has been poisoning communities of color for years sits on the same tract that a plantation sat on that enslaved the ancestors of those very same people. This is deep. Mm-hmm. This stuff goes back a long way. And to recognize not only the history of the footprint, but also what that has meant for the people who have come up in that community, it gives urgency to why we fight so hard about this. Sharon Levine and Jamira Levine in Rise St. James, who have been doing this for years now. Shamira is second generation of pushing this fight. It brings me such joy to be able to write about the fact that they won one of the fights. Right. And still pushing and encouraging true David and Goliath stories that are right here around us from communities that said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And that's the type of encouragement that I write about in the book. And I'm hopeful we share these stories so that somebody else can be encouraged in their space, that they can see their own.
Right, because, all these big companies come in and they want to make changes, and, people can come together and stand up and fight. It ain't going to be an easy fight. We know that. But just the fact of having a voice and being able to come out and say, hey, no, not in our community, not in our backyard, those sorts of things. So I think that that's really powerful, and that you are sharing those stories so that we can kind of see who some of the heroes and sheroes are in that vein. One of the other things that I thought about is about the whole point of people going into outsiders coming into communities and wanting to buy up the houses, and reasoning why they're coming in to buy up the houses, and what happens to the people who get displaced where others come from the outside and buy the homes. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes. In the book, I write about meeting Brad Pitt. You have to buy the book and read about my encounter with Brad Pitt. But I think it is a great example of, even in a space like New Orleans post Katrina, where with all good intentions, there is a desire to help reinvigorate communities that have been environmental justice or have been impacted by extreme weather and gentrification, but it doesn't always come out the way that it's intended, especially if it does not have the input of the people who live in and are from that community, because those are our community experts. So we see this happen in places like Bahama Village in Key West, where you have a indigenous community, African American community of color that has been displaced because people want to go and they want to not only buy up the property, but vacation in Key West. Mm-hmm. Even though the storms are coming faster and harder, it creates this place of what we also call like blue lining and green lining, when insurance companies come in and say that in order for you to build a property in this space, you have to be able to self-insure. Now, I don't know about maybe the audience that's here. I know I can't self-insure nothing right now. The average person, that's not what you do. That's not even an avenue that you have. So the very fact that people who have lived on, have owned, have earned property, who have been able to even hold on to property in some very prime real estate areas, are now forced to move because of the changing climate, but also because you got people who want to come in and build up or have the means to do so, is a part of this issue and this struggle. You know, we are at a place where both the need to have a really strong protection of our people and planet is now combining with innovation, with brilliance, with intelligence from all over this country, but particularly from communities of color that have experienced this. Now we're beginning to say, okay, what and how can we be better protectors of land and property and culture? How can we show and identify with other parts of the communities around the world, quite frankly, the way that we can do this? And I think there are certainly examples that I put in the book, like community land trusts, where people can get together and get property, and you're not only being conservators of the land, but also ensuring that you have affordable housing for the community. And pockets of places. One of my favorite places is actually in and around the Atlanta area. Okay. West Atlanta Watershed Alliance.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with them.
Yes, they do an amazing job of working not only to be conservators. They're actually one of the only Black conservators in the country of a special plot of land that sits in the middle of Atlanta, where the former Atlanta Negro Leagues baseball used to play. That's a green space that community is protecting. That's off, not only right there in the middle of the city, it's right in the middle of the neighborhood. And it is, again, this indicator of what the possibilities are, how we protect legacy, how we protect green spaces and people when we're given the opportunity, when we have the resources, when we raise our hands and say, this is important. No, we're not going to allow this to be separated, torn up, and pulled apart. So if you ever go over there and get an opportunity to sort of go off onto the conservatory and on the side of the mountain that's literally in the middle of Atlanta, not too far from the interstate, it's amazing.
Yeah, I definitely need to do that, because I am on, like, they have a lot of events and I follow them, but it's just a matter of making the time to actually go. But as you were talking about the land, it made me think about, and this impacts our communities a lot as well, our food insecurity in certain areas, because we hear all these conversations about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. You know, we go vegetarian, go vegan, be plant-based, you know, all these sorts of things, but not really understanding how in some cases that can be a challenge, number one. And then also some people may not understand how, say, for instance, cows impact the environment. So just talk a little bit about that.
Yes, that's one of that was a fun chapter in the book to write about, and actually is one of the first chapters that I wrote,
Okay.
because I was building off of a piece that I had written for All We Can Save that said collards are just as good as kale, and identifying our relationship with food and our relationship in the African American community, of how we have had to learn how to sustain our own beings and the beings of our children, in comparison to what the conversation is now around climate crisis, food deserts, and this idea that we need to be taught how to do and live better. So I loved exploring this. I got a chance to even start off with a story about an experience my husband and I had together, which was a lot of fun to be able to write that. Ultimately, I think it comes down to us centering what we know about both our history, how we've had to take care of ourselves. Enslaved Africans didn't have a choice about what they got to eat.
Right.
And the idea of how we talk to people on changes that are good for our entire planet, not just ourselves individually, but us as a collective, should address some of those past injuries. So when you have someone like Tabitha Brown, who is absolutely amazing at doing this, right? She makes me want to eat carrots that taste like bacon.
Right.
She knows how to talk to the community in a way that not only addresses that need we have to feel included, need that we have to feel this is creative, but also says it's okay that that's all we used to have. Now we have something different, and connecting to this is where we actually came from in the first place. Right. A lot of African cultures were vegan by nature. Some of these things that were introduced into our diet were not introduced into our diet just because we had to have a cheeseburger. It was introduced into our diet because this is the culture that we were forced to be a part of. But the creativity of our communities have aided in now us being able to be the number one demographic that looks at how we want to change our eating habits. When you look at the statistics of who is becoming vegetarian and vegan and the reasons why, African Americans are trending to be the number one demographic that not only is moving in that direction, but is doing it because they know it's good for the climate. And it's like an awakening of, well, this is what we have always done. This is what we have always been part of. It's not easy to do it if you live in a community where you don't have access to a grocery store. Right. It's not easy to do it when there's something in the book that I define as the EPT. Everybody knows what an EBT is, that electronic benefits transfer card that you get when you need supplemental food or SNAP program. But I define something I call EPT, which is the environmental poverty tax. It is expensive to be poor. Mm-hmm. And when we are already in scenarios of having poor communities, it becomes that much harder. And there's additional things that we need to add to the cost of food. If you live in a food desert, which is identified as a community that if it's urban, you don't have a supermarket or ability to get fresh food within a walking or 1 mile distance. And if you're rural, you have no access within a 10-mile distance. But either way, you don't have access to fresh fruits or vegetables. It's the going to a corner store and you can pick up some hot Cheetos and a Coke, but you cannot get an apple. Or you're going and just need and want to have something fresh that's not processed that you're making as a part of a meal. And you, instead of being able to get mashed potatoes, actual potatoes that you can cut up and cook and mash, you got to buy a bag. Or it is the idea that even going to McDonald's is cheaper than going to a grocery store, because you got to add in the cost of transportation. You need to calculate the cost of childcare if you are not going to the grocery store in the middle of the day because you have to work. Right. So, how much time you're spending in the grocery store, and the sadness of even dealing with the racial disparities, the fact that we have had shootings in grocery stores targeted at Black people. It means that mom who's got 4 children and is trying to make it every day is not going to stop to figure out the nutritional value on the back of every label, because she's trying to get her children fed, she's trying to get home safely, and she might have to take several means of public transportation just to get the collard greens in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that poverty tax, I think, is even made higher when people are living under what we call a cloud of pollution. If you live in a community where you've got chemicals that are around you 24/7, you got to drink plastic bottled water. Mm-hmm. The expense of having to have plastic bottled water, and what that adds to just being able to feed your children every day. If you are in this space where the chemicals are impacting your skin and you have eczema, that you might need special soap, that's an additional cost to being poor and taking care of yourself in these spaces. And these are the things that are exasperated in food deserts. And part of the reason why addressing like petrochemicals, reducing the pollution that people have to deal with every day, is so important. And in the book, I try to dig into, what is this pushback we feel? What is it that we sort of tense up about when we hear the climate movement say, oh, we don't need to eat as many hamburgers? So you really want me to go tell my Uncle Clarence, my Uncle Bay, this is doing
yeah, no hamburgers, no ribs on the
grill. That's the solution? No, Lord, say it's not so. Because that presents, again, this challenge that we have of telling people they need to correct a problem that they did not have anything to do with in the first place.
Come on.
So we have to begin to change that narrative and change that conversation so that we can see ourselves in both the solution as well as how do we teach what our survival methods have been. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of us we still survive in this.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, there's one more section in the book that I want to hit on before we start talking about some of the solutions and ways that people can get involved. Because believe it or not, we've got about 10 minutes left. Believe it or not. Good conversation. Excuse me. I love in the book that you talk about education and weather and things like that, voter suppression. What should I say? This is spoiler alert. A way to fix a lot of these things is to vote. Be involved in the process. So that is a spoiler alert. But I love the fact that you also include faith because, in a lot of Black communities, and of course, people have different systems of belief and faith and all of that. But, a lot of people in Black communities are Christian, and how that faith and churches can tie into the things of taking care of this world that we live in. So talk a little bit about the things that you share in that particular chapter.
I love that chapter. And that was one of the chapters that actually we debated on a little bit because one of my editors like, well, does it really fit? And I said, yes, it fits. Just figure it out. We'll just figure it out. It's going in here, right? Because it is really, as a Christian, and I am a woman of faith, I am a Christian, and being brought up in that space, I was fascinated at how often we talk about the environment, these environmental pictures, right? In everyday scripture and life. It's in our hymns, it's in our prayers. We learn the 23rd Psalm. We talk about rivers and valleys and clear water. But then when it gets to Jesus, we just want to say that Jesus and climate don't go together. And that baffles me, because the whole tenet of the Christian faith is to take care of, is creation care. God gave us charge over this planet. And I think we confuse that sometimes with dominionism, charge over. It's ours to rule over. No, it's ours to take care of. It is ours to be wards over, to make good decisions about, in the same way that God makes good decisions about us. We are to, according to our faith, have the mind of Christ. Well, the mind of Christ doesn't say go use up everything.
Right.
It actually, it says quite the opposite. It says to be a servant of. So we're actually supposed to be a servant of through our faith. And there is really a strong church theology that is beginning to really expand that message and step into it in a way that's not afraid. I think the opposition has tried to put a copyright on Jesus and say that, no, this is our Jesus, and our Jesus doesn't believe in science. And I said, nope, we're going to challenge that, because according to scripture, Jesus talks about protecting people and being of love, of being reflective of what his Father commanded him to do. And that now being our responsibility to do, being caretakers. The best way I have been able to communicate this to folks, especially if you come from the education background, is you think of a building principal and a janitor. And they both have the same set of keys. That janitor can open every room in that school building that the principal can open. And the janitor is in charge of not only knowing how much toilet paper has been used, but knowing when it needs to be replenished and reporting to the building principal what has to be done. We think we're the building principal and we're really the janitor. God is the building principal who has the same set of keys, has given us this set of keys to take care of this building. But we want to be the building principal and do God's job. So right. I hope through reminding people in scripture that no, our job is to be caretakers of this planet and to reckon with the images that God gave us to make sure that they're done equitably. I might know what a stream is in Mississippi, but those kids who might be in Detroit walking through their neighborhoods, their images of what clean looks like, and they're going and singing the same hymns I'm singing, is different. So how do we create what that's supposed to look like? I was at Columbia Seminary about 2 weeks ago and talking about this very same thing. And I said, in scripture and Psalms, it was fascinating to me that we could read about how in one King James version, a description of rivers, and another version be a description of floods. So what was it about these very European-based versions that kept describing things one way, but when we got to more modern versions, they were describing it in a different way? And it's this realization that for some people, the same body of water can be a flood to one and be a river to another. It's our responsibility to make sure that things are serving the people and serving the planet in the right way, and that we're not causing harm on these communities in a way that is unequitable or provides more benefit to one than the other.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I am a person, I love to get outside. I love to walk, through some of the communities. Like near me, there's what's called rails to trails that I guess at some point in time it used to be railroads, and now they turned them into these beautiful walking trails. I'm on the outskirts of Atlanta. It doesn't feel like I'm on the outskirts of Atlanta when I go out there. And it's just so beautiful to see nature. But then also I do realize that somebody had to go through there and put that trail there. So of course there's been disruption because of that. And understanding, but there is such a connection, just to listen to the birds, or to, like, one of the last times I went walking, a family of deer ran across in front of me and things like that, to realize we're all a part of this great ecosystem.
One of my favorite, and I know we're closing up, but one of my favorite Instagram, TikTok reels this trend was Black men frolicking. When I tell
Oh,
you it
wow.
brings me so much joy, if you get a chance to go and look at it, I encourage you to do it, because it was a whole trend of nothing but Black men going out into like a random field and frolicking. And I know there were people like, this makes no sense. Why is this a thing? And I said, it's because we did not have the ability and freedom to go out and enjoy the same field that our counterparts were able to enjoy. We couldn't see it in the same way.
Right.
That was a place filled with fear, not only from past experiences of what happened in many of those fields, but also the very real and present danger of seeing a Black man running across the field and what that could indicate from police or other people who want to be the police. So to see this trend,
want to be the police,
right? that just trend of seeing men of color, grown men, enjoy in nature was profound. And I hope we get to more of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, solutions. I already gave one away. Vote. vote, and vote for the people
and again,
and the policies.
And the policy. Absolutely.
But, are there any other, just specific action items that the average person can take if they are interested in, being more involved in how climate and environmental issues impact their communities?
I will give you the top. Actually, in the book, there's what we call the Streetlight Action Plan, and so it's called SLAP. Sometimes we need to get some pop in there, and at the end of the book, it is a list of 50 things that you can do. But those top ones, talk about it. Number one, which is what we're doing right now. We're already taking action. Just any and every social issue that possibly could concern you connected to climate. I promise there's a connection there. And then number two, normalize the conversations in every day. Every single day, there's a way you can connect it and just begin to normalize talking about climate change as a part of your life. Number three, sharing your stories from how you connect, like we talked about, nature and family, survival, like share those family stories. And number four is one that you can stop and look up. And that's the NAACP has something called fossil fuelery. They have reports 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. You can go to the NAACP website and look it up. It's a great primer to understand what the fossil fuel industry has been doing. And then last but not least, vote. In every single chapter, I put as an action item, vote for policies that are protective of people. Vote for policies that have climate and action plans. Vote for policies in education that provide not only climate education, but safe spaces for students to learn in different healthy environments. Whatever you do, vote, vote, and vote, because that is the key indicator that can help transform so many of our policies in this country.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This was really good. And as I said, as a person who didn't consider myself, what should I say, involved in, or maybe sometimes even concerned with, just to be honest, because a lot of people, you don't think. Mm-hmm. But, as I told you before we came on, there are so many ways, and of course we couldn't talk about all of them, but thinking about how it impacted the schools, thinking about my family who grew up in these different parts of the country, because just real quick, like my dad's little small town that he grew up in, was a coal mining kind of area. And of course, we know coal mining is terrible, for health wise and stuff like that. But I can remember going through there as a child and seeing how, things were happening and, the smoke coming out. So some of the things you talk about in the book, and just thinking about now, that place is like a ghost town, and even though it was not a predominantly Black community, like what happens in some Black communities, they brought the road through and pretty much tore up the city. So when I went up there last year, it was like what happened? What's going on? And I do have some family members that still live in the area just because that's their home and that's where they are, and they'll probably never leave. But it's just wild, to think about those sorts of things. So I appreciate you, causing me to look at things from a different lens, and that's what this whole space is about, whether we're talking about climate or, last week we were talking about sensual faith. Hey, every week is different.
But and it's all connected.
It's all connected. All of these things are important. All of these things impact us in a variety of ways. And the more knowledge that we have, the more, they say we can speak truth to power.
Yeah.
And we can find those places and spaces where something, is tugging at your heart and your spirit, and you can say, okay, this is something I need to step into because it's important, not just for me and mine, but for what's ahead. The people
Absolutely.
that are behind me. So thank you so much. I want you to hold on for just a second.
I can.
And I'm going to announce the next couple of weeks, but I do want to say a proper goodbye to you because, I like you.
I like you too.
I mean, I like everybody, but I told y'all, I don't know why I was emotional, but I get earlier on when I was talking to Heather, but I think it's just because all of the things that this book touches on and realizing how much it really impacts, our lives is probably why I got emotional. So anywho, in terms of, I'm gonna pull you off screen, but don't go anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here.
All right, don't go anywhere. I'm just gonna take you off screen while I make my announcements. So next week, we are going to have a special guest, Beverly K. Johnson, not Beverly Johnson, the famous model, but Beverly K. Johnson, who is a health and wellness coach. She's going to be on to talk to us about nutrition. She's also a personal trainer. She's just going to come on and give us some things that pertain to our, our bodies and our physical health and things like that. Then in a couple of weeks, we will have, and I have the book over there, so forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, but we will have Dr. Monique Rainford coming on, who's going to talk about pregnant while Black and just the different things that are happening with Black women and pregnancy and, having children and all that. And I'm pretty sure that there are going to be some things that Heather and I talked about that play into what happens with mothers and their babies, Black mothers and their babies. I'm pretty positive. Just things in terms of environment and access to different, whether it's healthcare, things like that. So that's coming in 2 weeks. So for everyone who was able to join tonight or is watching in the replay, thank you. I appreciate you. Please share it out so people can learn more about Heather's great work. Her book, as well as Dr. Rainford's book, they are available at the Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is attached to Bookshop. So if you get a chance, go check that out, as well as all the other people that I talked to who have actually written books. They are included in that bookstore. So thanks again for your time. I look forward to seeing you again real soon. And don't forget to buy the book and share this with others. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate you all, and you have a wonderful evening. Take care. Bye-bye.